Welcome to Real Estate Talk, where we're tackling your questions about real estate. Courtney, question today, who pays closing costs? Maybe we should start with what are closing costs?
Absolutely, Joe. Well, closing costs are expenses and fees that are typically associated with the purchase or sale of a home. So think taxes, think title insurance, appraisal fees, lender fees, and other services. When we're thinking about it from a buyer perspective, when you get closer to closing on your home, the lender will actually provide you a document that's called a closing disclosure for you to review. Now, typically, you get notified of estimated closing costs at the beginning. Like when you first go under contract, the lender gives you an estimate. Towards the end, it's a closing disclosure, and it will basically tell you kind of the difference between what they estimated and then what the final numbers are. The closing disclosure itemizes everything that a buyer will have to pay at closing. It'll also include the loan terms and the breakdown of the purchase price, the principal, interest, and the payments amount. And I really can't emphasize this enough, is like when you get to that point at the beginning of a transaction, but also right before closing, it's really, really important that buyers review these disclosures so that you're going into this eyes wide open and just be curious. Ask questions if you don't know between the estimate and the final closing disclosure. If you don't know what something means, be sure to ask.
Yeah, I love doing that early on too. And
Yeah.
so let's go back to the original question, which was who pays closing costs? So
Yeah.
when customers used to ask me this, I would say, well, really both buyer and seller do. You just have different sets of closing costs, but some you do share. So if you just look at it in two buckets, on the buying side, you have lender fees, and you have probably about half of the escrow and title fees, whatever that looks like in your market. And then you have, if you have an agreement with the real estate agent, you have a fee to pay your agent. On the sell side, they don't have lender fees because they're not borrowing money to sell their house. You're the one that's buying it.
Yeah.
But they do have, again, agent commissions if they're working with an agent to list their house. And they have probably about the other half of all the escrow and title fees. So that's pretty broad, but it's sort of good way to just summarize what both sets of closing costs can look like.
Definitely. And you know what? There's ways that folks can estimate their closing costs ahead of time. Just know typically the range is between 2 to 5% of the sale price of the home. So if you're buying a $300,000 home, the closing costs could range from $6,000 to $15,000. But again, use that as a general estimate. Partner with the loan officer if you're a buyer, or if you're a seller with your agent and the title company. They can give you kind of a little bit more of a detailed estimate. The costs really vary for each home. So like the purchase price affects your closing costs, your down payment, the type of loan you choose, and then any adjustments that you negotiate with the seller. So buyers will sometimes make offers and say, hey, seller, I really need some closing cost assistance, and ask the seller to cover all or some of their closing costs.
And it makes sense, right? Because buyers have a lot of out-of-pocket costs that they're getting ready to buy this house, where the seller potentially is just dealing with net profit, where they might be willing to take a little bit less there to pay some of the buyer's closing costs because they're really dealing with money they're making, versus the buyer has down payment, paying the agent fee. They have this new house. They're going to be buying furniture and all sorts of things. So that happens pretty frequently. And I like what you said too, because everything really does come down to that contract. The range you gave is a pretty wide one. So people might be hearing this and saying, well, that's a really big bucket. And I don't know where on the 6 to 15, if that's what you said, ranges would fall. That's why it's important to know it as soon as you go under contract, because every situation can be a little bit different.
Yeah. And, you know, just to kind of double down on this, the nature of the market, right? Is it more of a buyer's market? Is it more of a seller's market? Does affect usually what sellers are willing to contribute towards a buyer's closing costs. And so that's why it's going to be really important. And I think I say this on almost every video, is having the right team so that they can educate you on what's the market doing, what do you need, and then really go to negotiate.
Yeah, because there's another element here that we should touch on, which is different types of either down payment assistance or grants or loans to help you pay for closing costs that might be available at the lender or even the local government level, municipal level,
Yeah.
where you've probably heard in the news before, and either past administrations there was down payment assistance all the way up to the federal level. There was like a first-time homebuyer credit.
Hmm.
But it really goes down to even the individual bank or lending institutions sometimes will offer grants to help pay for closing costs. So you really want to be aware of what's available to you. I've purchased a property before where I had down payment assistance through the city that I was buying in. There could be
Yeah.
some stipulations here where this particular city was really interested in increasing the amount of people that own the home in the market. And
Yeah.
so I had to stay in the home for a period of 5 years. Then over time, which the time a grant would be paid down, and I wouldn't owe as much as I did when I first bought the home, but I needed to stay there and live in that property for that amount of time. So there's some red tape sometimes.
That's a really good point because if, as a buyer, you're considering a grant or down payment assistance, you have to let your agent know early. And why that's so important is sometimes when you're working with those programs, because of the red tape that Joe had mentioned, it might take a little bit longer to get the loan fully approved and get you clear to close. And so you want to make sure that in your offer, you're setting the right expectations for how long it'll take for all of that to be wrapped up.
Yeah, exactly. And one more thing comes to mind too. This is actually more around down payment assistance, where we often see like a family gift option as well, where
Yes.
maybe you have somebody in your family that's contributing to the down payment. Usually there's like a letter involved just to make sure the lender is aware of that too. So that's another form of closing cost assistance, and that it's part of the down payment assistance of it too. But
Mm-hmm.
another thing, especially with affordability being what it is, we see that pretty often as well.
Oh, good point. Good point, Joe. Guys, if you have any questions or need any additional information about closing costs, make sure you take a look at what we have linked in the description box below. We will be back with another episode with tips to help you navigate the world of real estate. Let us know in the comments what questions you'd like us to answer in the future. We hope you have a great day. See you next time.